Good morning, everybody. Once again, a fantastic turnout, and we're not going to spend too much time on intros and anything like that. The panel this morning for this Q&A, third or fourth in a row, which is brilliant because it shows the interest, is Steve Brown, as usual, and Adrian Myberg, Marius van Wyk, and myself, Richard Bailey. And these questions were questions that I've put on the slides, so it's a little bit of a change for this morning. And so you'll see the questions on the slides, and these are the ones that came through in the last week or two. So they are recent, they are current, and it's the ones that you guys have asked. There are some duplicates that have not been included here. So if you don't see your particular question, it's probably because it's been covered, or it's going to be covered this morning, or whatever. But most of the questions are most certainly here. Guys, I don't know if you want to just say how's it, hello, and raise your hands and doff your caps.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, gentlemen. Welcome.
Good morning.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, let's get straight into it. There are a lot of questions to get through today. So, who is responsible for the payment of the COC on insurance replaced geysers? Well,
Richard, yeah, just to jump in there, depending on your insurance company, but they would either give you the allowance. I know that a lot of them don't give you much of a markup on the cost of the COC, so they'll have a fixed set amount for that within your components or your products. And then some insurers are, they've applied the principle of the owner should do it. So depending on what you've got in terms of your SLA, but most will cover the cost of the COC within their SLA and part of your spares, etc.
Yeah, quite right. Short and sweet. That's how I understood it as well. I know that some of them don't, for example, cover the bank fees associated with that every time, so it's cumulatively problematic. But that's tradition. I mean, the guy that's asking you to do the service must pay for the thing. Why are we not allowed to use vent valves? These questions, by the way, I haven't edited them, so I haven't changed them or changed spelling or anything like that. This is what it is. Now, I think Adrian is our drainage guru, but I think this is probably a hangover from what we were talking about at the time. And I think, just to put it in context, Adrian, this is a question leading on from somebody understanding that we were saying, you can't use a vent valve sort of just under a window and call it okay. There are certain positions and so on. Do you want to just explain a bit about that?
Yeah, just a quick add-on to that. If you go to SANS 10252 Part 2, 6422 will tell you that firstly a vent valve must comply with SANS 1532. So not every vent valve that is out there is actually acceptable. And then the standard carries on to say that you may only use that vent valve as a supplementary vent. In other words, you have to have an open vent somewhere on the system. You cannot have a system with vent valves only. The second requirement is that it should not cause any nuisance or danger to health. And then the biggest thing as far as some of the valves out there is concerned is that valve must be able to do pressure and vacuum relief. So there is no such a thing as a one-way vent valve. You either have a two-way vent valve or an open vent. But other than that, yes, you're allowed to use them if you stay within the rules.
Yeah, okay, cool. There are certain circumstances where you're allowed to use them and others where you can't. They can't substitute for certain things.
Yes.
Okay, this is quite a long one, but it's got just behind it. So what do we do when a client calls and has a solar hot water system, for example, installed by another plumber? He needs a COC and he calls me. The installation is non-compliant and the client doesn't want to fix them. Can I state all the non-compliance issues and issue the COC or just walk away? You can't issue a COC on anything that you didn't do. Let's start there. So if it's not your installation, you shouldn't even entertain the telephone call, because the COC is the work that you have done and you have carried out. With regards to if the scenario was, for example, please come and complete this installation that somebody else has started and couldn't complete, and then could you issue a COC? Well, then you have to do everything in your power to bring it up to compliance. In other words, if there are any non-compliances there, it's no good just noting them and ignoring them. You have to show that it has been impossible to rectify, whether for whatever reason. but you've got to, if somebody says to you, why didn't you rectify this? You've got to say, it's because of A, B, and C, and show the proof. So I hope that answers that one. Morris, I know you sitting in silence there, but if you have got anything to jump in, just please feel free. This is more of a current one that we got, I think, last week. It says, am I allowed as an essential service provider with a CICP permit, which installs fire hose reels and hydrant systems for a client, which is also an essential service provider with a CIPC permit? Now, those that's a little bit of Greek to me. Perhaps Marius or Steve would like to answer that.
Yeah, I can. I've actually had that call, and I think it's a similar one. Maybe it's the same person. And I know I spoke to Adrian about this. It's the case. The specific case was on a citrus farm, where the citrus farmer is expanding the warehouses, and he needs to put in these fire hose reels. Now, as I got also from Adrian, is that the citrus farmers, they have to have a permit, obviously, and then they have to have the, let's call it occupational health and safety, or whatever the case may be, that is relevant to the hydrants. And if that is not done on an inspection, they cannot export their product. So yes, as an essential service provider with your permit in place and everything that COVID-19 requires, the protocols in place, yes, you can go and do the service for the client. And it's not necessarily even that he's a CIPC permit holder, but the important thing is that this is not a new installation. If it's a new installation, by law, that would require you to wait to do that installation. But if it's part of his business and he's an essential service provider, and he cannot now export because his fire hose reels aren't installed properly according to standard, then yes, there's nothing stopping you from doing it, because you can prove that this is an essential service, it's for export purposes, and he is an essential service provider as well. Good.
Okay, so I've juggled these questions around a little bit. I've just noticed that it might come up in, not from the top, but from the bottom up rather. Okay, next question is, can a COC be issued should a geyser be non-compliant, such as no isolator? Can we make a note on the COC that section is non-compliant, or must only a non-compliance be issued? In other words, the question is, when we are notifying the client of a non-compliance, are we allowed to issue a COC on the back of that, of us having notified the client of the non-compliance? So you understand what I'm saying? Steve, do you want to talk to that, or should I?
Yeah, no, I think it's quite simple, guys. The COC is required in terms of the geyser installation. In terms of the isolator not being there, it's a note, non-compliance. You obviously advise the consumer of that beforehand, and you note it on your certificate of compliance, and then you are covered. So bearing in mind that non-compliance notice is very critical and key in terms of you're creating awareness to the consumer. It's written into the standards in terms of how it needs to be done. It is a requirement. And again, the standards are not there that you must upgrade everything, but in terms of the work that you do, you need to make sure that that complies, and that any non-compliance in writing, and it needs to be done in a manner in which they can understand. So you can certainly do that. And in the event of there being an audit, the auditor would basically look at your notes and denote that you've made you've been clear that there is no isolator on this installation, and the owner is aware of it, and therefore you would not be audited on that section in terms of that, or fail for that example. Simple. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, I think this next one is for Marius or Steve, which is much more qualified than myself. Adrian, I haven't forgotten about you, don't worry. Why do we plumbers or plumbing companies still have to be members of the Building Bargaining Council? This is obviously from the Western Cape. When we'll be able to get away from this? And obviously it's a bit of an issue through the Western Cape, and I know that a lot of negotiations, or a lot of gripes stem from this. Anybody like to comment on that?
Yes, I can maybe go on that. This has been for years. I know in my own company, I do also buy the stamps for two of the guys. Two other guys decided they're not interested. So, and I do know when we had it was called Streeksdiensterade. It was made compulsory that we belong to them and pay, and then obviously the bargaining councils. But I do not know where they get the authority to make it compulsory. You know, you can't actually have something compulsory in one region and not in another. So I think that maybe this is something that could be taken up with the MBA as well, because the MBA works very closely with the bargaining councils. But I know specifically in the Southern Cape, it's not compulsory. But I know in where Andre Gous is in Cape Town, they are bamboozled with this bargaining council down there. I don't know if they're just strong arming them or whatever the case may be. But on the positive note of that is that I actually prefer to pay for the stamps, because at the end of the year, you don't have to fork out that extra amount of money all of a sudden for their holiday fund, because now your holiday or that month holiday is paid. It comes back, they pay it back to you as an employer, and you pay it to your workers. And then obviously there's insurance as well. One of my workers recently, his son passed away, and it was like extended son of that wasn't even living with him. And once the proof was provided, within a day it was paid out, and they paid a sum of 10,000 Rand to him to do the funeral and whatever the case may be. So there's a very positive side to this as well. So, you know, without thinking it's negative, go and look at the positive about it as well. But I do know if some regions are making it compulsory, I presume that is what it is. But I would say that you can go and speak to the Building Bargaining Council and ask them to show you where it is in the Act that it is compulsory.
Okay.
Just to add on that, Richard, I have met with them down in the Cape and gone through it, and it was done in conjunction with Lee, myself, and Andre, and we've gone in and done it. And I think where the impact comes is obviously there's the cost of company for guys. I think Bloemfontein also has the bargaining council, but I don't know if it's as strong as what is in the Western Cape. But what does come into effect is in terms of the stipulations, in terms of what it is you pay your staff, etc. So there are other overheads that apply to that. And then if you're doing work for the insurance company, as we know, the rate that they put together is a standardized rate, you know, throughout the country. So therefore, it may be, you know, it's seen in some ways for those operating in the Western Cape and others where they have the bargaining council, is that the rate paid, you know, is negatively affected because of the different terms and conditions that apply within the Western Cape. But it is something that we've addressed and looked at. We weren't that successful in terms of getting, you know, the full bouquet of reasons and stuff. There are some positives and obviously negatives, as Mario said. Thanks.
Okay. The next one's for you, Adrian. All plumbers install a vent. I suppose that's paraphrasing. It's not all, but most plumbers install a vent valve about 300 mil higher than your trap seal fittings. If it's more than a meter from the window, is this acceptable?
The answer to that would be a big no. If we run through SANS 10 400 Part P 4.18.6, the caption starts off by saying a vent pipe or two-way vent valve. So what that means is that when the BCO looks at your installation, the same rules apply for an open vent and a two-way vent valve. And under those three or four requirements, you'll find that the first one says that it needs to be no less than 2.5 meters above finished ground level, and it needs to be not less than 100 above the closest part of the roof where it goes through, not less than 2 meters above the head of a window, or 5 meters in a horizontal distance of 5 meters from that said open end, and not less than 2.5 meters above the surface level of a slab that can be occupied by people. So yes, the fact that these things are sneaking in there does not make them right. But if you look at, like I said, if you quote 4.18.6 from SANS 10 400 Part P, the rules are clear and simple. Whether it's an open vent or a two-way vent valve, the same rules apply.
Okay. And then the next question is, we do work for most insurances, and for some reason the arguments are different. Some do not allow us to install isolators. Others say that we have to install either a loose isolator box or an isolator lid. The question is, should this be done by a qualified electrician? Now, if I may, I think the short and simple answer is it should be, according to if you want to be compliant according to the standards, I'm not going to I'm not going to expand on what actually happens out there, but I think according to the standards it should be. Am I correct, gentlemen? Or
yeah, I think, Richard, in terms of that, let's just be very clear. We're not electricians, and we're basically not allowed to do that. That's just a straight and narrow answer. Insurance companies will give you an allowable of 500 Rand, which includes and I'm just using it lightly there, they'll give you an amount and they will say, well, and then you get an electrician. Or the others will say, you install it, but then they must get the homeowner must get an electrician to certify that it's done correctly. It is not the right way of doing things. And obviously, cost goes down to that. Some insurers will tell you that you must employ an electrician. I mean, let's look at the reality of that, by employing an electrician full-time employed in your company. So there are challenges in terms of that. Unfortunately, most of the plumbers are doing it because of, it's a requirement of the SLA. Some insurers will say that would be betterment, and therefore that cost would be up for the for the homeowner to carry, so long as you advise them of it. So guys, just be please be careful in terms of that. In terms of how you're doing it, and just make sure that you do cover yourself when you're doing it. But the law is very clear that it falls under electrical, and because it's been one of those things that we've been doing forever and ever, doesn't make it right.
Yeah. Okay, the final question on this slide is quite simple. It says, with regards to geyser manufacturers, must the geyser be SABS approved? I think that's quite simple. Yes, it must. If you, it needs to be SANS 151 compliant. So no two ways, ifs or buts about that. Yes, it has to be SABS approved. Fortunately. Okay. Do you need to issue a COC with a 10-litre under-counter/over-counter geyser? Yes, you do. A COC is, you must issue it with any tank, any geyser, any hot water cylinder, and that is definitely one of them. So yes, you do. And leading on from that, in other words, it needs to be a compliant installation. And then I've put these two in blue because they're kind of similar. According to my understanding, merchants and manufacturers are supposed to be members of the PIRB, of the PIRB and IOPSA. Why is this then that they are not held responsible for the supply of compliant material, including giving the correct advice to clients? For example, lagging, and most of the time will sell a solar geyser to a client without the necessary system considerations, which can only be done by a qualified plumber, especially with regards to the Consumer Protection Act. That's basically asking about resellers. And the next one is, if a plumber can be sanctioned for not installing as per SANS requirements, why can suppliers that supply non-compliant fittings and components not be sanctioned? They are invoices. So it's the same question. What's happening with the suppliers that are willy-nilly supplying non-compliant materials to plumbers and supplying specialized products to non-qualified people?
May I answer that?
Sure.
Okay, just a quick correction at the top there, that the merchants and manufacturers are not members of PIRB. We've got plumbers registered with PIRB. IOPSA is the one that registers the companies for now. But getting back to the point, the Consumer Protection Act is very clear. There's a chain, or you're referring to a specific chain. You go to the merchant, you buy something, or they sell something to your client, you're the one that end up installing it. And when it says a plumber can be sanctioned, in other words, when you get audited or a municipal inspector comes along and he fails your job for non-compliant material, the section you're looking for in the Consumer Protection Act is section 55. It is very clear. It says consumers' rights to safe, good quality goods. It starts off by saying that every consumer has a right to receive goods that comply with any applicable standard set under the Standards Act or any other public regulation. In other words, if you, the plumber, went in and bought something from your supplier, you are the consumer in that regard, or at that specific point, you have the right to a product that complies with any applicable standard. So if there's a standard for a geyser or a trap or a cistern or whatever is up there, and you buying it, you are expected, or you can expect to buy something that complies with that standard. If your client bought it, then obviously the client's got the same right as far as being provided with compliant material.
Yeah, I think that sums it up. Would anybody like to add anything to that?
So I think also,
think that-
Richard, we got back to that before, is that, from the plumber's point of view, and I'm going to emphasize what Adrian said, no merchant is a member of registered with PIRB, it's individuals. In terms of IOPSA, you'll find that a large majority of the major sort of suppliers are members, and there are those that aren't. But I think the key thing comes back down to ourselves, as Adrian said. Are we asking the correct questions? The amount of times that I've had a plumber phone me and say, but the guy behind the counter told me to do this. Marius had similar ones down in Southern Cape, is that we all too often we take verbatim what the guy behind the counter is telling us, or he is selling it to the consumer and saying, yes, this will work. And, they'll buy a 100-liter solar system for a 4-bedroom house or whatever, and it's just not going to work. So I think it's up to us, the plumbers, in terms of again, communicating with those suppliers and advising them of that, and at the same time with the consumers. And there's enough info and people to back up, any of those statements that you would make with regards to the material. And bearing in mind, they have a choice. The owner can say, well, that's what I can afford, and you've just got to cover yourself correctly, that this has been supplied by the consumer. You've made them aware of that. One, you're not walking away from the work, but you are making them aware of the fact that the component's not right or whatever the case may be. So just cover yourselves.
Can I add there as well? There's something that the plumbers out there can do to assist this problem as well, is if you stop buying non-compliant products, it will stay on the shelf longer, and then suppliers won't refurbish that, because that is a typical thing of a supplier. If he has something on the shelf and it is selling, they'll resupply, and they'll always keep that shelf full. So if we stop buying non-compliant products, it will stay on the shelf, and just buy compliant products, they'll just buy whatever is selling. So we can assist the system and the network out there as well by doing that, buy compliant products.
Yeah, quite right. Okay, moving on. We've still got a lot of questions to get through. This next one basically is saying, look, if I come across non-compliant situations and installations, who do I report it to? And this is a real problem because look, the law, and Adrian, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but the law that makes non-compliant installations non-compliant is a local authority requirement, isn't it? So it should be able to be reported to the local authority because they are the custodians of the upholding of the laws. But it doesn't always work out that way. And PIRB or IOPSA, or be that two different entities, but it's very tough for them to just act on things like this, although they probably could facilitate a very, very bad case and bring it to the attention of local authority. But at the end of the day, it's local authority that need to take action, isn't that so, Arjun?
Yes. The main problem is normally that you'll find that you need a point of entry somewhere in that whole maze of officials. It's one thing reporting it to council, but if you report it to the wrong guy, it stays on the desk, or it's not my department or whatever. So yes, I agree with you. If it's really bad, you can probably you'd normally find the infrastructure and engineering guys are normally quite sharp when it comes to especially water and geysers and safety things. Or in the absence of infrastructure and engineering, straight to the BCO, someone should have signed that off, or someone should have looked at that. They can maybe point you in the right direction as well.
Yeah, and you'll see on the screen this.
Richard,
Yes.
just to add to that one, I mean, I get a lot of those cases where the licensed plumber, has gone to site and there's an issue and he's raised it, and there's a challenge either from the architect or the building control officer or whatever. And then it's like Adrian says, that point of entry is that request made from the plumber to IOPSA or PIRB, and then at that request, it opens the door. So we had one last week where there was a design done, and it was, you will do it this way, etc., etc. And, cut a long story short, it was regards to TP valves, 10 geysers, distances that were over 12, 13 meters long. And in our engagement, was that, after that, it was a straightforward sit down with all parties and saying, sorry, that's what the standards say. We've got the clarity. Please amend your drawings and do it accordingly. So I think the key thing is that, it's one thing to see it, and there are ways in which to address this. And I've had many, from body corporates to retirement homes to whatever, where the licensed plumber is doing the correct thing. And, it sometimes becomes a he said, she said. But then they come to and say, well, let's get that opinion from IOPSA or the regional technical guy, and we do get involved with that. And in most cases, it's resolved according to what the standards are, or they're made aware of it. Thanks.
Yeah,
I think
maybe is. Sorry, Marius, carry on.
Yeah, I think the standard, which actually puts it out very clear, is in SANS 10106 on solar, where they actually state there, if it's a responsibility of the owner once notified in writing to ensure the non-compliance is rectified. So obviously that's the first port of call, that you inform the owner. And then that note 3 that says, if the non-compliance renders the installation to be potentially dangerous and unsafe, the plumber should also notify the relevant authorities such as the building control officer and the Department of Labor, Occupational Health and Safety. So yeah, I think that is very clear, and I think that would pertain to just basically any dangerous installation out there. And that is, you'll find that in 4.4.2 of the SANS 10106 on solar.
Yeah. So look, there are avenues to report it. Ultimately, the responsibility rests with the local authority. However, IOPSA are more than willing to facilitate it. Like I said, and as well as Steve reiterated that because we're all in this same trade and we all want to get it right. So yeah, most times if something like IOPSA get involved and they look at it, and then the other powers that be, so to speak, don't really have a foothold, because they are shown in the standards, clear, black and white. There it is. This is what needs to happen. Adrian, this next one that has been on the screen is for you, right up your alley, my friend. Could I please have some clarity on whether one should clad PVC sewer pipes in concrete under foundations?
Okay, let's start from the beginning. The 10400 Part B has only got one requirement in 422.2. It says that your drain, if it goes under a building or passes under a building, it shall be protected against transmission of load being applied upon it. And then it carries on to refer to another standard, but the clear-cut answer would actually come from SANS 10252, where the standard is very clear. It says any portion of a drain that passes under a building should be encased in concrete in accordance with 5.4 of SANS SABS or SANS 1200 LB, or it'll be supported and placed in a selected granular material constructed in accordance with 5.3. So the option is up to Mr. Plumber whether he wants to go the concrete route, which is a very expensive and unnecessary one. And most of the guys just reinforce or they bridge the foundation over that portion of pipe to make sure there's no load being imposed on the pipe. Or you could have it in a normal granular fill and properly installed. I realized that the older earthenware pipes were encased in concrete in those 1 meter sections needed protection, but you know what? If you're looking at a UPVC drain pipe nowadays, there's no need to reinforce that in any event. If it was laid properly and bedded according to the standard, you don't need to clad it in concrete.
Okay, Adrian, and then I've just carried on and I've put another 2 drainage questions, and I'll come back to this guy over here. But if you wouldn't mind carrying on with venting, I know it's supposed to be 2.4 meters away from any opening. Does the vent need to go through the roof, or can we go around the roof with additional brackets? I think you've kind of answered that, but he's asking about having to penetrate the eave, and then it's asking, can you reduce the vent from 110 to 50? Okay.
The first one is simple. Yes, if your client is happy, you're putting an additional bracket on the actual fascia board and taking 2 bends around the eaves and up, as long as it's above that the roof level. The biggest issue was you don't get lead slates like we used to years and years ago. You could just slap on and put the tiles over it. So the waterproofing does become an issue when you're doing a roof penetration. But yes, if you do put two plain bends on there and you end up going in front of the actual fascia board and your client's happy, there's nothing keeping you from doing that. The more complicated answer would be for the next question. If you reduce your vent from 110 to 50, two things you need to remember. When we're looking at the standard 6756A of 10252 part 2, actually says that when it's a single stack, you will have a 110 mil stack and the vent will be taken up without reduction. In other words, if you picture a double-story building, ground floor, first story, this thing goes up to the roof, 110, the standard says without reduction. But then if you go to 6231, it'll tell you that if there's a stub stack, you need 110 millimeter diameter access on the top of that stub stack, which is a given. And then the next portion that directly after that says that if that stub stack requires venting, it shall be ventilated with a vent pipe that has a nominal diameter of 40 mil, in other words, a 50 OD, and it will be fitted as an offshoot to facilitate easy rodding. So yes, if you have a 110 mil stub stack on a ground story or on a normal single story building, you can have a 50 going as an offshoot off the side of the pipe, retaining that access on the top. But if it's a double story, it's 110 mil unrestricted.
Okay, awesome. I think that's pretty clear. So let's go back to this guy, the second question. The question is, do you need to issue a plumbing COC when installing a gas geyser? Am I correct in saying that a gas geyser needs to be installed and a COC? It's not. First of all, let's differentiate between what constitutes a geyser or a storage tank. So if it's a storage tank, something that stores water that has got a capacity, let's call it 10 liters or 20 liters, then it needs a certificate of compliance. It falls under the Pressure Vessels Act and so on. But most gas geysers, what we call gas geysers, are instantaneous, and therefore they're not storage tanks. And you would need a gas installer's certificate to for that thing. So you as the plumber would come and connect it with your incoming and outgoing lines, however the manufacturer requires it. But for the rest of the connection, that's pretty much a gas installer's connection. I don't know if you want to expand on that, Steve, but
yeah. So let's just be very clear. You need to be registered with the LP gas if you are installing it as a complete system. So you have to have that and issue the LP gas certificate of compliance. And bearing in mind that in terms of PIRB is that, if you've done work over the value of 1,500 Rand, so if your cost to do that connecting up and fitting and everything else was more than 1,500 Rand or 1,500 Rand, then you would be required to issue a certificate for that.
Sorry guys, can I just chip in with some, well, it's very important information as far as I'm concerned. When you're doing a gas installation, the standards are very clear when it comes to geysers and everything else being installed and all the rest of that. For a plumber to sign off on a gas geyser, you'd be taking a huge risk. The first, or there's a couple of things. The standard says that if you're using a gas geyser or point of use gas geyser, that means that you need to be responsible for the actual pipe sizing, simultaneous use, balanced pressure. There's about 5 or 6 different things that you need to be able to comply with, including, and something that we don't have at the moment, is a SANS compliant gas unit. The guys that are installing these things, they'll be quick to pull out an LP gas certificate to say this thing complies. Yes, it's gas safe, but it's not compliant to the standard for those point of use geysers. So my suggestion would be, when it comes to gas geysers, don't sign a COC on this. Don't get involved with them firstly, but if you are being dragged into a house where this is being done, get yourself away from that, because if you do get audited or you run into a BCO that knows a little about water, the first thing they'll tell you is that your installation's not balanced, blah, 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 and they'll give you a list of things that you need to fix. And I can tell you from experience from our local authority, we've had about 3 or 4 wet services engineers try to plumb or try to change the plumbing to a gas geyser to make it compliant with the standards. And they, as of now, or as of this morning, I've not seen an approved design anywhere in the country. So I'd be very careful to sign a COC on a gas geyser.
Yeah, that's my sentiments exactly. The next question is, I want to know if issue a COC on an insurance installation and 2 weeks later this insurance sends a different plumber to come and uses different plumber to rectify, or to not rectify, but to come and work on that installation. What happens to my CNC, and who takes responsibility, and how do I know what has been changed? Well, I think it's pretty clear that if you issue a COC today on a geyser, and somebody comes tomorrow and amends that installation, they have taken ownership of that installation, and your COC is they must issue another COC because the 10254 says that any maintenance or replacement or repair of the installation must be done according to this standard, or the current standard, and that includes the issuing of a COC. So when you work on a geyser, it's a new COC, and that's the situation. So yeah, unless anybody wants to add any more to that.
Yes, I think maybe, Richard, very important. Always, we all have cameras to our on our phone. So take a photo of the installation you did, so that if anything happens, or another plumber works there, you've got evidence on your phone that you can show that when you left the installation, that is what it looked like. That's very important. And even as far as the thermostat is concerned, take a photo of that thermostat once it's installed. Show the owner you've set it to the correct setting, being 55, be it 60, and then you can show him. And then tomorrow when he calls and say, listen, the water is not hot or not cold, you can have proof of what you set it to, that it is set properly. So that will help you. It'll save that extra call out again.
Very good advice. Very, very good advice. Okay, why can't we supply photos of a geyser installation with the COC so that the auditor can see if something looks wrong? That's a very good question, and Steve, you'd be able to talk about this as well. But the much touted new system of the PIRB, and from the auditing side and from the plumber side, is literally around the corner. And that is in fact a feature of that new system, where you are able to, as the plumber, as the installer, you are able to almost create a repository of pictures and information about this particular installation, and it goes and it's stored. It's there for you to look at any time, and it's there for anybody to look at who's got access to it. So that very thing will be available with the new system. Am I correct in saying that, Steve?
Yeah, look, we would, but I'm going to be quite honest with you. Having doing auditing and being in part of projects where photos have been done, it certainly doesn't work. And you can take as many photographs as you like. We've all got a good side and a bad side. We've had challenges. Is this the right job? Was it somebody else's job? So getting away from the practical installation of that, bearing in mind, if I take some of the projects we've been involved in, you would give the guys, 10 critical items in terms of taking photographs from. And, some we took, get them and you figure out whether he stood on his head or if he did this or whatever. So, yes, it's an idea, and it was raised yesterday in one of the meetings that I had with guys in the Free State. But I think we're a long way away from that and doing what we would call a desktop sort of audit on it. And we see that from plumbers that have signed certificates for work that their guys have done, and they don't check it properly, or it hasn't been done in the correct manner, and then it just becomes an absolute problem. It may evolve that way. I'm not saying that it isn't, but right now I would certainly be against it.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to imply there that the auditors are able to do desktop audits, but certainly there is going to be a repository, a space for you to be able to store all the photos of a particular installation in the same space as the COC. It's not going to serve for the auditor not having to visit the site, but certainly you can store those photos and you can add it to the COC per se. Lastly, well, last on this slide, I'm just carrying on until somebody tells me to stop. There's still quite a few to go. So it says, what certificate of compliance do I use for the sale of
Sorry,
property?
Richard, I think if we can just tie up on the question, and how many more have we got there? Because I think, we're running over in terms of the session, and I know some of the guys need to go. But
Yeah,
again, Ruben, by show of hands, I mean, there seems to be, and I don't know, of the 280 guys in the room, we do have other questions. There may be other ones coming in. So we quite, and again, I'm speaking out of turn. But if it's adding the value, then we can continue this, in terms of getting through these questions. I think they're very important. So, Ruben, I don't know if we can do a hands up or whatever. I know next week we've got next week Thursday again. But is it something that we should, carry on? And I need that, from those in the room now. Is that, do we address this again next week and continue with these, just so that we can get these things through and answer these really good questions that are coming through?
All right, Steve. Well, yeah, so to the audience, if you want to, if you agree with Steve now and you think we can continue, you can just click the raising of your hand button, then we can see how many hands are up. All right, so I'm seeing, yeah, close to 100 hands are already up. So Steve, you can make the call.
Well, if it's 100, then that's 1/3 of the audience.
Yeah.
So look, I'll just to let you know, there's 3 slides of questions after this one. So it's quite a lot still, and I think we'll be here for another 40 minutes if we were to finish all the questions. So maybe
carry on with it next week. Let's just do one more question, just round up from the guys. I know that I've got other webinars coming, and then if we're happy, guys, and I really do thank you for the time that you spent, if we can pick this up next week.
Yeah, I agree, and
100%.
because I mean, to rush through it, it doesn't do it justice. So I think we do need to take the time and answer these questions properly. But the last question on this slide, let's just wrap this slide up, is asking which COC do I use for the sale of property. So there are only certain metros or certain local authorities that require COCs for sale of property. Cape Town's one of them. I'm not sure. I'm ignorant as to which other metros do require it at this point, but I know Cape Town does. Cape Town has their own COC which you can download from their website. So that is it's called a Section 4, Schedule 4, I beg your pardon, and it is free. It's downloadable. Anybody can get it, and you just need to fill it in and hand it over to the homeowner. It's not as binding, I would guess. Well, it is legally, but it's not as you're not going to get audited on it, let's put it that way. So there's no real follow-up in terms of quality control with the thing, but it is it's there, and that's what the transferring attorneys require. That's what the city requires. PIRB currently, as we speak, are working on a document that that would fill that space, hopefully on a national level. Exactly how that will pan out and work, I'm not sure, but it is going to. Well, I'm not going to, we're not going to go into that now, but it's being designed to take that space and be a bit of a Rolls-Royce document with its thoroughness and its detail, and really leave the homeowner in a very, very secure and nice space, if I can put it that way. I know, Steve, you're involved with that. I don't know if you've got a last word or a comment on that.
Yeah, I think
Adrian is also involved with that.
Yeah, it has been seen and more coming through. And, we have seen some plumbers getting into trouble by issuing the PIRB COC. Because, again, it goes back to, those hidden things hasn't been covered properly. With the Schedule 4, a lot of our complaints come through in that the homeowner believes that, all their plumbing is now okay. And 6 months later, after transfer, a plumber comes onto site and then starts identifying items of non-compliance. So the document that we've been working on for a couple of months now is way down the line in terms of being completed. It then has to obviously go through the applicable channels. But we are seeing a lot more interest coming from other parts of the country other than Cape Town. And it's like a necessity in terms of having some kind of form of document together that does incorporate everything, and it is really a good guideline, for the plumber in terms of bringing consistency in. So that's where we are.
Maybe
Okay,
I can add
awesome.
what you can do for the interim. For the interim, obviously, I think the person who asked that question as well is, has had that question most probably from a lawyer. A lot of lawyers doing transfers now request a certificate of compliance for the plumbing. But what you can do is just to state to them that the certificate is not designed for that purpose as yet. And in the interim, you can use on our IOPSA website, we have a home inspection list, which you can use, and then give a detailed report. So what I do is when I have that request is I say to them, listen, you will not receive a certificate of compliance, but as a licensed plumber, I will do an inspection and I will give you a full report on the plumbing of the house. And that means full report, you take photos and a detailed report feedback. And sometimes documents like that can even end up to be like 8 to 10 pages long. So that is what you can use in the interim, and just certify that you are a licensed plumber with a PIRB, and put your number on that letterhead of yours as well. Thank you.
Okay. With that, gentlemen, I think we're going to end it off. We've got lots and lots of ammunition for next Thursday still, so we'll be busy. But thank you very much to everybody. And